Aesop's Fables number 2, embellished with 111 emblematical devices. Today we'll be looking at the frog and the fox, the ass eating thistles, and the lark and her young ones. These are public domain from 1814. The Frog and the Fox. A frog, leaping out of a lake and taking the advantage of a rising ground, made proclamation to all the beasts of the forest that he was an able physician, and he was able to cure all manners of distempers, and he would turn his back to no living person. This discourse, uttered in a parcel of hard, cramped words, which nobody really understood, made the beast admire his great learning, and gave credit to everything he said. At last, the fox, who was present, with indignation asked him how he could have the impudence, with those thin lantern jaws, that meager, pale physique, and that blotched, spotted body, to set up for one who was able to cure the infirmities of others. Application. A sickly, infirm look is as disadvantageous in a physician as that of a rake in a clergyman, or a sheepish look in a soldier. If this moral contains anything further, it is that we should not set up for rectifying enormities in others while we labor under the same ourselves. Good advice ought always to be followed without our being prejudiced upon account of the person from whom it comes. But it is seldom that men can be brought to think us worth minding when we prescribe cures for maladies with which we ourselves are infected. Physician, heal thyself is too scriptural not to be applied upon such an occasion. And if we would avoid being the jest of an audience, we must be sound and free from those diseases of which we would endeavor to cure others. How shocked must people have been to hear a preacher for a whole hour declaim against drunkenness, when his own infirmity has been such that he could neither bear nor forbear drinking, and perhaps was the only person in the congregation who made the doctrine at that time absolutely necessary. Others too have been very zealous in exploding crimes for which none were more suspected than they themselves. But let such silly hypocrites remember that they whose eyes want couching are the most improper people in the world to set up for oculists. Fable 5. The Ass Eating Thistles. An ass was loaded with good provisions of several sorts, which in time of harvest he was carrying into the field for his master and the reapers to dine upon. By the way he met with a fine large thistle, and being very hungry began to munch it, which, while he was doing, he entered into a self-reflection. How many greedy epicures would think themselves happy amidst such a variety of delicate viands as I now carry? But to me, this bitter, prickly cactus, this thistle, is more savory and relishing than the most exquisite and sumptuous banquet. Application. Happiness and misery, and oftentimes pleasure and pain, exist merely in our opinion, and are no more to be accounted for than the differences of tastes. That which is one man's meat is another man's poison, is a proposition that ought to be allowed in all particulars where the opinion is concerned, as well as in eating and drinking. Our senses must inform us whether a thing pleases or displeases before we can declare our judgment of it, and that is to do any man good or evil which his own understanding suggests to him to be so, and not that which is agreeable to another's fancy. And yet, as reasonable and as necessary as it is to grant this, how apt are we to wonder at people for not liking this or that, or how can they think such and such? This childish humor of wondering at the different tastes and opinions of others occasions much uneasiness among the generality of mankind. But if we considered things rightly, why should we be more concerned at others differing from us in their way of thinking upon any subject, whatever that, at their liking, for example, cheese or mustard, one or both of which we may happen to dislike? In truth, he that expects all mankind should be of this opinion is much more stupid and unreasonable than the ass in the fable. Fable 6. The Lark and Her Young Ones. A lark, who had young ones in a field of corn, which was almost ripe, was under some fear lest the reaper should come to reap it before her young brood were fledged, and able to be removed from the place. Wherefore, upon flying abroad to look for food, she left this charge with them, that they should take notice what they heard talked of in her absence, and tell her of it when she came back again. When she was gone, they heard the owner of the corn call to his son. "Well," says he, "I think this corn is ripe enough. I would have you go early tomorrow and desire our friends and neighbors to come and help us to reap it." When the old lark came home, the young ones fell a-quivering and chirping round her, and told her what had happened, begging her to remove them as fast as she could. The mother bid them to be easy. "For," says she, "if the owner depends upon friends and neighbors, I am pretty sure the corn will not be reaped tomorrow." The next day she went out again upon the same occasion, and left the same orders with them as before. The owner came and stayed, expecting those he had sent to. But the sun grew hot, and nothing was done, for not a soul came to help him. "Then," says he to his son, "I perceive these friends of ours are not to be depended on, so that you must even go to your uncles and cousins and tell them, I desire they would be here betimes tomorrow." Well, this the young ones fell in a great fright. They reported this information to their mother. "If that's be all," says she, "do not be frightened, children, for kindred and relations do not used to be so very forward to serve one another. But take particular notice what you hear said the next time, and be sure you let me know it." She went abroad the next day as usual, and the owner, finding his relations as slack as the rest of his neighbors, said to his son, "Hark ye, George, do you get a couple of good sickles ready again tomorrow, and we will reap the corn ourselves." When the young one told their mother this, "Then," says she, "we must be gone indeed, for when a man undertakes to do his business himself, it is not so likely that he will be disappointed." So she removed her young ones immediately, and the corn was reaped the next day by the good man and his son. Application. Never depend upon the assistance of friends and relations in anything which you are able to do yourself, for nothing is more fickle and uncertain. The man who relies upon another for the execution of any affair of importance is not only kept in a wretched and slavish suspense while he expects the issue of the matter, but generally meets with disappointment. While he who lays the chief stress of his business upon himself and depends upon his own industry and attention for the success of his affairs, is in the fairest way to attain his end, and, if at last he should miscarry, has this to comfort him, that it was not through his own negligence and vain expectations of the assistance of friends. To stand by ourselves as much as possible, to exert our own strength and vigilance in the prosecution of our affairs, is godlike, being the result of a most noble and highly exalted reason. But they who procrastinate and defer the business of life by an idle dependence upon others and things, which it is in their own power to effect, sink down into a kind of stupid abject slavery, and show themselves unworthy of the talents with which human nature is dignified. This ends our reading. Please subscribe to this channel and support when possible. Thank you so much.